Greetings to you today. I pray God's richest blessing upon you. It is a privilege to be able to share God's word with you. Verse 14 of 1 Chronicles chapter 13 introduces us to a character in the Old Testament that perhaps we have not paid too much attention to. His name is Obed-Edom. Hear the word of the Lord. The Ark of God, or the Ark of the Covenant, remained with the family of Obed-Edom in his house for 3 months. And the Lord blessed his household and everything that he had. So this Ark of God, this Ark of the Covenant, is now in the household of Obed-Edom. And what was this Ark of the Covenant? What was this Ark of God? Well, in Exodus chapter 25, verses 10 to 22, we have a description of what the Ark of the Covenant was. God's command to the people was, have them, the people, make a chest of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. What does that look like? Well, that's probably the size of an average communion table in a local church. Overlay it with pure gold, both inside and out, and make a gold molding around it. Cast 4 gold rings for it, and fasten them to its 4 feet, with 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other. Then make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Insert the poles into the rings on the sides of the chest to carry it. The poles are to remain in the rings of this ark. They're not to be removed. Then put in the ark the testimony which I will give you. Make an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide, and make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub on one end and the 2nd cherub on the other. Make the cherubim of one piece with the cover at the 2 ends. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking towards the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark, and put in the ark the testimony which I will give you. There, above the cover between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark of the testimony, I will meet with you and give you all the commandments for the Israelites. So what is this ark of testimony? Well, according to Hebrews chapter 9, verse 4, we have in this Ark of the Covenant certain items of great significance. Those items are the golden pot that had manna in it, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the commandments. So this manna was in there, manna that was provided by God on a daily basis for the children of Israel. Not too much, not too little, not enough for them to store it up, because if they were to try and store it up, well, it went bad. So it was God's provision, the daily bread of the Lord's Prayer, if you like, God's provision for the children of Israel as they needed it. We have the tablets of the covenant, which are, of course, the 10 commandments on the tablets of stone that God gave to Moses. But then we have another item in there of tremendous interest, and that is Aaron's rod that budded. Now, if I would be so bold, that Hebrews chapter 9 sort of understates quite some as to the power of Aaron's rod that did more than bud. It did more than blossom. And I want to share with you just how significant that is. Aaron's staff, referred to as Aaron's rod, in Numbers chapter 16 and 17, and right through those 2 chapters, that rod or that staff was significant for the following reasons. It was Aaron's staff, or Aaron's rod, that turned into a snake in the court of Pharaoh. And when others would come and replicate that same miracle, if you like, then the real miracle came when Aaron's snake, or Aaron's rod, or Aaron's staff that became the snake ate up all the rest. The power of God. It was Aaron's staff that was used to turn the waters of Egypt into blood. It was Aaron's staff that was used of God to bring those plagues upon the Egyptians. But it was Aaron's rod in this final example that really demonstrated the power of God to the children of Israel themselves. There was some unrest in the camp of the Israelites because the everyday, ordinary, run-of-the-mill person didn't like the fact that God had bestowed favor upon Moses and upon Aaron. And so there was unrest in the camp. They came before them and said, "What makes you so important? What is it about you? We are all the people of God here. We all have authority and we all have rights." And so it was to be that the 12 leaders of the tribes were to bring their staffs, if you like, or their leadership rod before the Lord. And the command was for all of them to leave those staffs before the Lord, including the staff of Aaron. And in the morning, when they came back to see what had happened, not one of those staffs had budded, except for Aaron's, that had not only budded, but it had flowered and it had brought forth fruit. It had brought forth almonds, which is very significant. For surely that is a metaphor for all of us to not only just bud, but to flower and to bring forth much fruit. Therefore, it became very, very clear, according to what the experiment had brought forth, is that the rod that would bud and flower and bring forth fruit was the rod belonging to the person that God had chosen. And so that would have been the end of the story, because God had clearly spoken. But God spoke again, and he said to Moses, "Place Aaron's staff permanently before the Ark of the Covenant to serve as a warning to the rebels. This should put an end to their complaints against me and prevent any further deaths." The Ark of the Covenant was a sacred object, more than an object. I feel even awkward calling it an object. This was core to the understanding of God. And in fact, it is an eternal understanding, because John in the book of Revelation in chapter 11 verse 9 saw the Ark of the Covenant. He saw God's temple in heaven opened, and the Ark of the Covenant was seen within his temple. We're going to see this again. We are going to be introduced to the great truths of what God really intends for his people and for his creation, and that is that he intends us to be serious about understanding who he is. And within all of us, he has placed the great truth that he provides for our every need, that he has called us to bring forth much fruit, and that he has called us to obey the commandments. If you are one of those who have moved on to the New Testament, leaving the Old Testament, Exodus, commandments behind, then I say to you, have a visit again to the Old Testament. Take another look and examine carefully what God has placed not only on tablets of stone, but in the tablets of our hearts. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the Ark of the Covenant, because it is germane to the story of Obed-Edom. Obed-Edom is now a player in the narrative of the children of Israel recovering the Ark of the Covenant, which had been stolen and taken away by their arch enemy, the Philistines. The Philistines had used the Ark of the Covenant as some kind of a trophy that they had taken as the spoils of war, if you like. But in the 7 months that they had the Ark of the Covenant, it caused them nothing but trouble. A misplaced presence of the Ark of the Covenant will always cause us problems. They didn't know what to do with it. They didn't understand its significance. But today in the church, folks, we do. We do understand the significance of God, and our responsibility is to live up to that significance and to recognize that we serve a holy God. God is our example, and he presents his example to us in the form of Jesus. And so now the children of Israel, led by David, is taking this Ark of the Covenant from the house of Abinadab, and they are on their way to Jerusalem. They're on their way to the city of David, and then something happens. As Uzzah, who is the son of Abinadab, is leading as one of the choir members and one of the orchestra, if you like. It's a time of celebration. They're out in front of the Ark of the Covenant. It is on a cart, by the way, being pulled by 2 cows. The Ark of the Covenant begins to tip over, and Uzzah, in a reaction, leans forward to try and catch it and touches it, and violates the command of God that said anybody who touches the Ark of the Covenant will die. And immediately he is struck down. David is upset. In fact, David's more than upset. David is angry that God should take a dealing with one of the sons of Abinadab, in whose house the Ark of the Covenant had already been for a little while before they started out on their journey. If anybody didn't deserve this, it was Uzzah and it was Abinadab. They didn't deserve this, according to David, but David's negotiation and David's complaint and David's anger was not enough for the occasion. But he decided that the march to Jerusalem would have to be suspended. And as he looked around for a place to store the Ark of the Covenant, he decides on the house of Obed-Edom. And the Ark of the Covenant, containing these tremendous reminders of God's presence and deliverance, would be placed in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months. 3 months. That's an amazing statement, because the historical record of the Ark of the Covenant remaining in the living room, if you like, of Obed-Edom, his wife, and his children, would present certain problems. Obed-Edom had already seen what had happened to Uzzah when he touched the Ark of the Covenant. And if you can imagine a house that was probably not very big in those days, it would be a typical Middle Eastern, very modest house. And the Ark of the Covenant, with all of the measurements that I've given you, placed in the living area of this home, and a home occupied by a family. And mom and dad would say, hey, listen, don't touch that. And you know the reaction of a child whenever they're told not to touch something. They'll usually try to, or at the very least they'll ask why. The amazing thing is that this Ark of the Covenant remained in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months, and everybody came out unscathed. It was a tremendous time, in fact. It wasn't just a time to make it through. It was a time to rejoice. It was a time to be filled with the glory of God's presence in your household. You wouldn't want that to end. We would want to say, let's keep this going for another 3 months. Oh, David, do you have to go up to Jerusalem now? Could we not just keep this going for? We've got a good flow here. We've got a good rhythm going on. We're enjoying the presence of the Lord. But no, it was time now for the Israelites to proceed to Jerusalem so that many, many more people would be exposed to the glory of God in the Ark of the Covenant. They could come from all over the Jewish world and they could see it and they could feel the presence of God in the midst of his people. And so God blessed the faithfulness of Obed-Edom. And as he looks at this Ark of the Covenant being taken out of his home and on the road to Jerusalem, he was faced with a choice. He could either stay where he was and enjoy the memory of 3 months where God was in his house, where God was in his living room, where God blessed his family, or he could actually embark on a new chapter in his life. Friends, I think that is the crux of the matter. I think we're at a point in time, and I think we perhaps always have been, where we're tempted to settle for a great memory. We're tempted to settle for a nostalgia. And there is a difference between memory and nostalgia. Memory is something we remember and we learn from and we apply to the next chapter. Nostalgia is something that we remember, but we are longing to get back to it, and we're preoccupied with a longing to get back to it that we deprive ourselves and God of allowing us to be used in the next chapter. And so Obed-Edom makes a decision that, as good as that was, I'm not going to be one who's going to sit in my rocking chair and tell my children and my grandchildren, oh, we had 3 great months where the presence of God was here. I'm not going to be one who's going to be able to record a historical event, say, oh, wasn't that a tremendous time? No, I want to go where God is at work. And so he becomes part of the choir as they march their way now to Jerusalem. And when he gets there, not only is he part of the choir, but now he is assigned responsibilities at the south gate of the city, ushering people to see where God now dwells in this Ark of the Covenant, placed in a construct already prepared by King David. The interesting thing about the south gate is that it's also called the dung gate. And this is where all of the waste from the animals would be thrown out of the city, and it would just be there. It wasn't the most pleasant area. Why couldn't I have been assigned the north gate? Why couldn't I have been assigned some other gate? But the south gate, oh, come on. But not a word of complaint from Obed-Edom. Not a word of complaint from one who had the presence of the Lord in his living room just a short while ago, but rather a sense of honor, a sense of privilege that, wow, I get to do this. I get to stand at the dung gate. I get to stand where nobody else would want to stand, to be able to usher people to where the presence of the Lord is, and not keep the memory of 3 months in my living room all to myself. Oh, God bless the faithfulness of Obed-Edom. He blessed the 8 children that he had, listed in 1 Chronicles. He blessed the 62 grandchildren that he had, listed in Chronicles, also the 26th chapter. God blessed the faithfulness of Obed-Edom, not to be content with memory and nostalgia. Friends, I say to you today that as you reach certain milestones of life, and as you accomplish great things for God, I ask that you would use them as building blocks to the next chapter of life, that you would use those as opportunities to grow and to learn, that you would use those as part of the history and the narrative that God is writing into your life and into my life, that faithfulness for 3 months is but a precursor to faithfulness perhaps in another arena, where we are not just allowing God to be exposed to our nearest and dearest, but we are actually allowing God to be exposed. We humans, allowing God to do anything is a mystery in itself, but we are part of a great plan where he uses us to fulfill his will. And to fulfill his will was to be part of a choir and the musical instruments that would be played on the way to Jerusalem with great joy and with great praise. And then once there, stand in the awkward spots, stand at the dung gate, stand where society perhaps is at its worst, stand where it's not comfortable, stand where it smells, stand where nobody else will, and point people to the presence of our loving God. May the Lord use his word to encourage your heart today and to lead you on to new things that he will show you as you present yourself as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto him. May the Lord richly bless you today. All glory and honor belongs to him. Amen.